value your time and don't want to keep you out any later than we need to on a snowy night. Maybe it'll be that 6 inches that they talked about today will happen while we're here. My name is Ellie Shook. I'm the director of the Creek Watershed District. I'm thrilled that you all are here on a wintry day. We have people here in-house. We have a few folks online. So this is one of our bonus liquid lectures. I hope you're ready to drink in some knowledge tonight.
Whoa.
This is where education meets libation. Oh, I had a little free time today, so I came up with that. All right, so who doesn't want to learn about watershed health while enjoying a cold brew? Well, tonight we would just be a bunch of thirsty humans in a desert of ignorance, but yet here we are. So we are the Fountain Creek Watershed District, and we're the only organization daring enough to tackle this watershed from Palmer Lake to Pueblo. And we work by doing on-the-ground creek restoration projects and engaging public outreach, which you are participating in tonight. We're the superheroes of clean water minus the cape, okay? So we've done $35 million in creek restoration projects, and you might be familiar with our Creek Week Cleanup or the Great American Cleanup. And this is our Brewshed Alliance, where we partner with 25 different breweries. This is our little chicken tender, we call it. This is our home watershed. But 25 breweries, because what's the #1 ingredient in beer? Water. Exactly. So it makes a lot of sense.
Does anybody make beer with the actual creek water? That's what we should check into.
Fountain Creek itself is not a direct water source. Water that is utilized here in the region, 20% of it comes from local sources, and that is held in reservoirs. So Pikeview Reservoir is by the creek, by Monument Creek, but a lot of it's those high, Rampart Reservoir and the reservoirs on Pikes Peak. So our Brewshed members are fantastic partners. They host events like this. They support our cleanups. They do fundraisers. They'll do post-cleanup hydration celebrations, because that's a great way to celebrate after removing a whole bunch of trash. And so tonight, I'm just really thrilled with tonight's speaker, my friend Jim O'Donnell. He's the real reason you guys are all here. Get ready to be dazzled by his stunning photography and to hear about his Fountain Creek book. And trust me, it is a real page turner, okay? He will be signing copies later, and maybe you can get a selfie with the man of the night tonight. So we're going to dive.
What's the picture?
Yeah,
That's extra charge, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's the special for tonight.
Yeah, right.
Usually it's more.
So let's dive into tonight's presentation by raising a glass of clean water. Cheers yourself for being here. Thank you. To our home watershed. Just a quick introduction on Mr. Jim O'Donnell. He was born and raised in Pueblo, Colorado, and actually we discovered that both of our grandfathers worked at the steel mill together back in the day, okay?
And then I hung out with her cousins when I was a little kid.
So small world is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
He obtained a BA in archaeology and a master's in community and regional planning from the University of New Mexico. Jim has worked as an archaeologist, a raft guide, a public lands advocate, a watershed restoration specialist, and a journalist. He has 3 children, runs a consulting business from Taos, New Mexico. And Fountain Creek, Big Lessons from the Little River is his second book. The first copy is, or the first one's over there in case you're curious. And his next book will be a history of America's troubled cultural relationship with wetlands.
That's an idea.
Possibly.
Yeah, that's a possible idea.
Possibly. So
I've got several ideas.
Several ideas. So, all right, well, we're thrilled you're here. I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
All right.
And thank you all for your attention tonight.
Yeah. So let's see. First of all, I want to thank Allie. I met Allie right when I started this project, like at the very beginning, and she was enthusiastic from the get-go, and gave me all these names of people to talk to and places to go, and it really boosted me, and has been a great support throughout this whole project, and actually the entire district has just been really fantastic support. So just want to really thank Allie and the district. And then I also want to acknowledge David here, who took me fishing on the fountain a bunch of times and kind of introduced me to to some of the fish issues along the fountain, and was really fun, and I look forward to fishing on the fountain some more, even though, you know, we had one homeless guy yell at us one day when we were catching fish. He said, "Don't eat that, I shit in there." Gotcha, buddy.
Did you give us advice?
Yeah, and then I want to thank John. His book on Colorado Springs was not only an inspiration, but also just super educational for me in understanding the order and the way in which all of the. Messing me up here.
I'm sorry, it wasn't sharing.
Oh, okay. Is it sharing?
Sharing.
Okay. But yeah, just really want to acknowledge John Harner and his book about Colorado Springs. Definitely pick up a copy of that. It's fantastic. It's well researched, and it was super helpful. And then I also want to thank the other David for great conversation about all of these issues, but also for helping me learn some birds and go birding, and that I love that. I love it as much as I love fishing. So just want to again say thank you to all you guys. Let's see. So I'm just going to start off with a reading from the book. This is from a chapter called Heron, and so July 27th, Clear Springs Ranch. And you know, because my eyesight's getting bad, I need some extra light here.
It's not sharing on the screen.
It's still not?
It's showing this. I'm sorry.
Or you can do watch. We got to go out of presenter.
Good thing you've got this, right? Yes. Okay.
All right. Oh, also, Ferris Frost is on Zoom, and Ferris was also a help in this book too. So you guys are actually in the book. So thanks for coming to the event. All right.
Real life action here.
Yes, absolutely. So Heron, July 27th, Clear Springs Ranch. Where the fountain turned, then flattened, a solitary heron waited beneath an overhang of grasses. He was blue-gray from the distance, white about his face, with a black line of feathers above his eye that trailed behind his head. His snake-like neck flowed with each step. I had come across the fields and through a stand of cottonwood elders filled with jays. They dropped into the grasses and shrubs, gathering insects and the fruit of the red and yellow currants lining the trail. The jays squawked and called, mimicking crows, ravens, and the red-tailed hawk perched in a snag near the bridge. Rain was coming. I pulled on my jacket and jumped from the bank to a gravel bar dividing the creek. I trailed the heron, keeping distance. The western horizon, framed by the mountains, disappeared behind a curtain of falling water. The heron continued upstream, plodding, scanning. A pair of snowy egrets perched near a pool formed by a triangle of stone slabs. The water, spilling over the rocks, frothed silver bubbles. The egrets fished minnows and chubs, swallowing them in gulps. The heron arrived and poked at the egrets. It was not a violent stab, but a sign to move on, as if to say, "This is my spot, my pool." The egrets crossed the fountain to another hole upstream. This one formed from a beaver-cut cottonwood that had collapsed into the flow. The heron hunched, a spring poised on long stilted legs. I left the gravel bar and sat on the bank, watching. For an hour or more, the heron stood unflinching. He waited for fish to come and be eaten. The creek moved on, glassing. Water has the magical power to create beauty, or at the very least, to conceal what is broken. Water buries the shopping cart, whisks plastic bags away, and washes drug needles to the Gulf of Mexico. or at least into the Arkansas River. Over time, it smooths over the shotgun casings and rounds the edges of broken glass into colorful stones a child can safely stuff into her coat pocket. Sitting by the creek, watching the still pools reflect the sky and the current ripple the sediments, it was hard to imagine the fountain full of sewage, forever chemicals, microplastics, and viruses. Along the treetops, the hawk circled, the pale of his underfeathers crisp against the blackening sky. He may have been out hunting before the rain. If he wasn't serious about it. He turned, circled, and only once called out a hoarse key. Then he glided down, swept up, and flew off. Something else caught my attention, a pair of porcupines scurrying across the cottonwood branches, gnawing bark. Just after 2 in the afternoon, a man walked along the forest path. He carried a bulky camera topped with a massive lens. He fumbled with a tripod and said he was looking for western tanagers. I told him I had seen none. Instead, I pointed to the porcupines, the egrets, the heron. He claimed to be on a mission for the tanagers, and that was all he wanted. And he had not expected rain, so he hustled downstream. 10 minutes later, I could see him where the fountain curled east. A rush of mallards, golden eyes, and teals poured over his head, making north into the storm. He seemed not to see the birds, and then he was gone. The heron had not moved. The clouds dropped to the treetops. The creek, wide and still, mirrored the near black of the storm. Rain arrived, and the drops scattered the mirror in thousands of concentric circles. I opened my umbrella and zipped my jacket. The heron bent, sodden, and then struck. The speed at which a heron snatches a fish, or in this case, a frog, boggles the mind. I've seen it now dozens of times, and I struggle to comprehend, probably because my feeble human body could never spring like a heron. The bird swallowed the frog. The rain came in sheets. The fountain rose, turning a dank orangish filled with sediment. I thought I could wait out the storm, but the wind folded my umbrella and my boots filled with rainwater. I raced for the cottonwood grove. Lightning arrived. Thunder raced the heels of the flashes. The fountain pushed its banks. The heron had not moved. The photographer was gone, and I made for the sheltering bridge. So, a little taste of the book. Start out there. Oops, and you're supposed to have the picture of the heron. Sorry about that.
So one of our fish bowls there.
There's some audio issues.
Yeah, I think that's near there.
Sorry, they're having audio issues on mine.
Are they?
Try to just switch something with.
So far away. Okay. Let's see, let's go back to this. Sorry for all the technical difficulties here. So, most of us, you wanted the picture of the heron. There we go. So most of us have a pretty good idea what we mean when we talk about Fountain Creek in general terms. So I'm just going to do a real quick overview. Fountain Creek is born in the snows of Pikes Peak. And, the whole Fountain watershed, for that matter, it's an odd little waterway, as we all know, tucked up between the mountains and the plains right here, southern Colorado. It's a tributary to the Arkansas. It covers only 928 square miles, and the entire length of the creek from the slopes of Pikes Peak to the confluence in Pueblo is only about 80 miles. But as far as population goes, population and urbanization, the fountain is one of the fastest growing watersheds in the Western United States. It's estimated that around 1 million people will live within the fountain watershed within the next 10 years. So, Allie probably has this problem, but when you're asked to talk briefly about the fountain watershed, I stumble through that. People say, tell me something about the fountain watershed, and I say, read the book. Right? It's complicated. Even for such a small sized watershed, it's an incredibly complicated watershed, but it's also one of the most interesting water systems that I know of. And I tried to sum this up early in the book. Just another quick read here. Early in the book, I wrote, Fountain Creek is one of the most human-dominated water systems in the American West, and that's saying something. Over the years, the fountain has been dammed, diverted, poisoned, rerouted, mapped, named, channelized, filled with physical and human debris, reduced, augmented, confused, litigated, studied, stolen, replaced, piped, known and unknown, forgotten, remembered, misunderstood, blamed, monitored, sampled, screened, and very nearly tamed. More than anything else, humans have altered the very nature of the fountain, pumping water from Colorado's western slope into the fountain watershed, making what once was an occasional creek into a full-time river. Across the American West, climate change-driven drought and altered precipitation cycles collide with overconsumption, drying up quote-unquote real rivers. So the creation of a new river then is something that is a little bit mind-bending. So let's focus on that sentence for this presentation. The creation of a new river. So you see, to me, one of the reasons I find the fountain so interesting is it's kind of, I call it the poster child of the Anthropocene. I don't know if you all are familiar with this term, but it's a term that some people have coined to describe this geologic age where humans dominate the planet. I mean, we dominate every aspect of the planet, right? There's been a debate among geologists as to, should we actually adopt that and aim for the science? They so far rejected it, but it's growing in usage because it says something, right? It describes a time when humans control everything.
When does that time start? Like when we appeared on the planet, or when we started like industrializing or making impact?
Yeah. No asking difficult questions, young man. No, it's a super hotly discussed issue. Is it some people have proposed that the Anthropocene actually began with the European invasion of the Americas, right? Because it so dramatically altered the climate of the entire world by when Europeans killed off so many Native Americans that the forests regrew and literally altered the world's climate. So it's, everybody's got a different answer for that. And I don't, some want to start in 1945 with the dropping of the atomic bomb, but so, the fountain is a totally human-dominated system. There's nothing natural about it anymore. And I think that's interesting as hell. So let's step back a little bit. I just want to tell you why I came to write this book. So I was living in Europe, and in 2003, I walked 1,500 miles across Finland for about 5 months, interviewing Finns about their relationship to nature for my first book, which is Notes for the Aurora Society. I'm selling copies of those. I want to get rid of the last 5 copies of those. But then I had a follow-up plan. So, when I was in high school, I got into Zebulon Pike, and I read his journals. I read biographies of Pike and historical analysis of Pike, and just totally nerded out on Zebulon Pike. And so I got this idea that in 2006, which would be the 200th anniversary of his journey from St. Louis out here and then down into Chihuahua, Mexico, that I would retrace his route. I was going to walk the route and then write a book about it. But then suddenly, my daughter showed up, and then my son showed up, and you know, priorities change, right? So then, you know, during COVID, COVID really, I think it had a profound impact on all of us. But I think for me, one of the most profound impacts was that, you know, when COVID first started, everybody kind of like joined together and we stayed home, and it just seemed like, oh man, you know, we're gonna get through this together, right? And for a couple months, those first few months of COVID, I actually had this elated feeling because I thought, wow, this is a demonstration of when the world's faced with a real crisis, we can all come together and we can do the right thing. And I'm thinking we can solve climate change, right? And then by the summer of 2020, it's like, oh, this is a fucking disaster. Excuse my language. I'm kind of bad now. No reason together. And we can't cooperate. You know, it tears us apart. And for me, that was a huge emotional hit. And you know, and it brought me really just way down. And so one day I took Pike's journals, and I was sitting by the creek in Pueblo, and I started thumbing through the journals and started thinking, you know, God, my daughter's almost off to college. My boys are in high school, and you know, things are changing. Maybe I should revisit this idea of Zebulon Pike and following the route. And I thumbed through the pages, and I came across what is probably the only two descriptions of the fountain that Pike read. And he wrote, "The riverbank began to be entirely covered with woods on both sides, but no other species than cottonwood." Later, when he attempted to climb Pike's Peak, the Pike he noted how his group of 4 slept right on the banks of the fountain next to a solitary juniper tree, and he writes, "without water and extremely cold." So those are the two first European or Euro-American descriptions, written descriptions of the fountain. The Spanish do mention it, but there's no real description. This is actually like a description of not very much. So I started to think about that in terms of the creek. And something else kind of came up to me was, you know, when I was a kid growing up in Pueblo, we used to go play in Fountain Creek, in the sands of Fountain Creek, because there was no water in Fountain Creek. And, you know, it was the kind of creek that we dig, my friend Scott and I would dig in the sand, and eventually some water would kind of bubble up, and we'd sit in the pool and, you know, and then kind of catch little tiny chubs and minnows that were running around there. But essentially, the creek was dry, right? Unless there was a flood, it was dry most of the year. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, water in here all the time now. And I started to think back in the late 80s, early 90s, started to show up all this water in Fountain Creek. So it just started coming in my mind, this question of what is a river? What is that? Like, how do you define a river in the age when humans dominate everything? And so I realized I wanted to know everything I could about the fountain. But despite all the data collection, you know, there's really very little information out there about it. At least compared to the Arkansas and Colorado River. You know, people write, it's like 20 books a year published about the Colorado River, and podcasts and newspaper articles and radio programs, but nobody writes about Fountain Creek. There's USGS studies, there's CPW studies, there's CDOT studies, there's some newspaper articles here and there, but really there's just not much. I looked around, nobody's written a book about the fountain. And so, you know, at the same time, I felt like in addition to the archival research that if I'm going to write accurately about the fountain, like I really needed to know it viscerally, right? I needed to get my feet wet, literally. And so, at this point, I've walked about 90% of Fountain Creek. From the confluence in Pueblo, to Goodland Park, I speak, including most of the tributaries. I have a couple landowners I'm talking to right now, so I can finish it 100%. I haven't walked the entire length of the creek. This endeavor involved a lot of trespassing, begging for permission, wet clothes, and a lot of backtracking. So much backtracking that while the creek may be only 80 miles long, I'm sure I've walked somewhere closer to double that, probably. And of course, along the way, I took a boatload of pictures, and that's what you guys are getting assaulted with today. Can I borrow that? Yeah, thanks, man. So weird. So one of the things I wanted to accomplish with this book was to try to understand the multiple voices and viewpoints that exist in this community. We all have a different take on the fountain. We all have different opinions. We all have different information. Colorado Springs feels one way, Pueblo. There's the unhoused people. There's farmers, ranchers, anglers, environmentalists, polluters, and developers, right? And I wanted to bring all these voices, to the fore and have them in the book. Even though my particular narrative and my particular values, my values drives the narrative of the book, I wanted to include a diversity of voices as I could. So the book does jump around, and for those of you who started reading it, you realize that I didn't want to present a kind of a boring A to B history of the fountain, like a historical narrative. I wanted to paint a full picture, a tapestry of what this creek was like, what it feels like, and what it might mean to our children and grandchildren. So, again, we could sit here and talk all night about, the pollution, the PFAS and the E. coli, laws governing waterways, the bringing water over the mountain from the Colorado Basin, the beingness of rivers as potentially sentient entities. We could talk about the unhoused folks along the creek, many of which I've become friends with and gotten to know over the course of this project. But I wanted to really kind of focus on this idea of tonight, this idea of what is a river and why does this river have water in it year round now? What does that mean and what are the problems that it's caused? So, move forward here. So, like I said, when I was a kid, played in the sands of Fountain Creek. There wasn't year-round water there. My grandpa, who worked at the steel mill for 40 years, he used to get really excited when there was water in the fountain. He'd actually come over to our house and be like, "There's water in the creek." He thought it was cool because it was so rare. Because the fountain is traditionally ephemeral and water is rare. And I think that reflects in some ways on our relationship, our confused relationship with this waterway. Let me read just another passage here. So let's start talking about the human relationship with the fountain. In the cramped one-room collection center that is the Pueblo County Historical Society, I opened a rusty drawer crammed with maps. They were folded, rolled, and stacked, many crumbling and fragile. The drawer also held dozens and dozens of dried out, broken rubber bands that seemed like earthworms turned up at an excavation. I was curious how the fountain was portrayed on historical maps and how its name changed over time. As I unrolled the maps, small handwritten notes floated to the floor. Proposed mountain water project for city of Pueblo, circa 1936. And side view of locomotive, circa 1910, or E.F. Gabati, and one that simply said foundry. Growing up, we never called the fountain by anything other than its Euro-American name. I'm not sure I even knew the origin of the name until I was in my 20s. Yet on some maps, as late as the early 1960s, the fountain was labeled the Fontaine-Kibouy River. As the official 1890 map of Pueblo gives La Fontaine a fair shake against the larger Arkansas,
offering an aerial view looking south towards the confluence. An 1897 USGS map labels it as Fountain Creek and shows the channel hemmed in on either side by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, the Denver and Rio Grande Railway, and the Union Pacific, Denver, and Gulf Railway. An undated map of downtown Pueblo shows the Arkansas and Tiny Salt Creek, but not the fountain. Based on the style and the layout of the town at the time, I'm guessing this map was drawn sometime in the late 1890s. The only way someone would know that the creek runs through the city is by the odd placement of houses and buildings along either side of a tiny blank space, snaking its way towards the Arkansas. The fountain was not labeled, not even distinguished as a waterway. The 1907 complete map of the city of Pueblo, Colorado by William Peach, city engineer, shows the Fontaine-Kibwe River not as a wide, sinuous floodplain, but rather a set of straight, parallel dotted lines marked main channel. Noticeably, houses turn up right on the banks of the creek. A map of postal routes in southeastern Colorado labels the waterway as Fountain Creek. On a 1928 voting precinct map, Le Fontaine is the boundary dividing voting precincts, and the precinct line runs straight down the channel bed. An undated Pueblo County zoning map, I presume to be from the 1950s, labels the creek as Fountain River, while a 1942 Works Progress Administration map labels it Fountain Creek. Most often, the fountain is but a single thin line on these maps, while the Arkansas is usually drawn in fine detail with varying thicknesses, loops, meanders, and braided channels. Sometimes the fountain is marked as a snaking set of parallel dotted lines and nothing more. Very few maps show the fountain with any life at all. On a 1950 El Paso County, Colorado Department of Transportation map, the fountain is but a single line without a label. Quite frequently, the fountain does not appear on maps at all. A water resources map from 1936 does not bother to show the fountain. In 1956, another CDOT map, labeled simply Pueblo, Colorado General Highway Map, rendered the Arkansas in beautiful flowing patchings. The fountain does not exist. It's just not there. And it seemed to me that the way in which the fountain was portrayed or not on maps reflected our society's ambivalence about such an odd little waterway. That so very many maps were produced without any acknowledgement whatsoever of the creek made it that much easier to devalue, overuse, and exploit. And so that's the nature of Fountain Creek, right? Ephemeral and rare. The Arkansas flows from year-round. The fountain was, for the most part, a wide and dry system that rarely held water. And then everything changed. So today, as we keep saying, the fountain is a full-time river, and this is not necessarily a good thing. It's over-appropriated, polluted, mistreated, and now it's full of all this new water that causes a whole new set of problems. And what we're seeing, and this is what Allie deals with, what we're seeing is that the fountain is pushing back. It's fighting to adjust to the changes that we've brought to the creek, and that is causing us, particularly in Pueblo County, but not only in Pueblo County, but it's a tremendous number of very expensive and difficult problems to solve, from severe erosion and sedimentation to an out of control problem with people who can't find housing. And these things are linked. And how we treat our waterways and how we treat the other people in our society, I discuss in the book, because I think they're one and the same thing. So to me, this is endlessly fascinating. We humans have taken a waterway that was one thing and we've turned it into another, creating a whole new set of problems and a whole new set of possibilities, hopefully. But just the fact that this was done, again, that question always comes up with me. It's like, what is a river in this case? How do we define that? So, okay, as a historian and an archaeologist, I know there's no such thing as fate. There's no such thing as inevitability. Everything around us, the lives we lead, the cities we live in, the water we drink, the problems we face, these are all the results of choices. A choice was made, there's a consequence for that choice, and then another choice is made, and so on. And this is how history works. It's a series of choices. So as a writer dealing with culture and history, one of my jobs is to link the past to the present and to help explain the choices that were made and why those choices were made. And that's, again, one of the main reasons I wrote this book. Because I think that if we can understand the present moment and how we got here, and you can't understand the present moment without understanding the past, we can create a better future. And that's why history is so important. And that's what we don't really teach our kids in school. We teach them dates and names, but we don't teach them why history is important. You can't understand right now without understanding the past. So, okay, back to the creek. So, I can't be sure, and if any of you have more information, please be sure to let me know. But I think that I've assembled probably the most comprehensive list of floods along Fountain Creek. Again, if it's not, let me know. The earliest mention of a flood that I could find dates to perhaps 10,000 years ago. The Nuchiu people, known that we call the Ute, they say this. Yet another Nuchiu story tells about the formation of Garden of Gods at the base of the peak. The origin of the story is unclear, and there are several versions, but it's most likely from the Tabawache band that lived on and around the peak. This story tells that at one time a flood covered the world, leaving only the peak above water. Thousands upon thousands of animals drowned, and the Creator turned the carcass to sandstone. As the floodwaters retreated, the sandstone carcasses created what we know now as Garden of the Gods, an otherworldly landscape of 300-foot tall rock that was once sand dunes and is now a crowded urban park. The fact that the floodwaters in the Nuchiu stories are fresh, because the heroes of these stories drink the water, and it's fresh water, it's not salt water. And this suggests these floodwaters from ancient glacial lakes, or even the melting of the Laurentide ice sheet. Or perhaps some of these are ancient stories of flooding along the fountain. I'm not going to really go into this here, but one thing we've really learned in archaeology over the past 25 years or so is that Native American mythologies are actually histories. And in many cases, they are histories of things that happened a very, very long time ago. Stories that have probably been passed down at least 10,000, possibly even 20,000 years. And increasingly, the archaeological evidence, the science, backs these Native American stories. And again, this is a whole other discussion, but I think, it should really change our understanding of the history of North America. But the first Euro-American mention of flooding along the fountain was from 1826. And all it says is major flood, details on mention of flooding along the creek from 1844 paints the picture of a springtime snowmelt-driven flood that extends from bluff to bluff. And I'm not quite sure what that means exactly, but if you stand along the creek kind of near south of the city of Fountain, bluff to bluff encompasses many square miles. And so I get this picture in my mind of a flood that is more like a slow-moving lake. That would today drown I-25, the train tracks, and every farm and ranch between Colorado Springs and Pueblo. But this is how the fountain naturally works. Dry most of the time and full of water here and there, and on occasion spreading over a rather large census. So, one of the things you might want to do in your spare time is get on Google Earth and spend an hour or so and look at the creek. Go up and down the creek using Google Earth, and you can see the floodplain, and you can see the way the creek has moved over the decades, over the centuries, across this really wide floodplain. And we've gone ahead, and also been seeing, we've gone ahead and built railroads, I-25, houses, farms, major interstate. In what was historically this floodplain. And so we've shrunk it down, as David was just indicating, we've really squeezed it in to a place that it's not naturally meant to be. So, when the Euro-American colonization of the stolen Native American lands began in the Piedmont, that area between the mountains and the plains, and the settlement of Colorado Springs came to be and then grew, Palmer and other settlers drastically changed the hydrology of Fountain Creek, Monument Creek, Ruxton Creek, and on. In order to create this city full of trees and parks and everything else. And it's really a city, as John points out in his book, it's really kind of a city that shouldn't be here. It's one of the only cities in North America that does not really have a natural water source. And it could not exist without importing huge amounts of water from the Colorado River basin. So we're talking about these changes in hydrology that were made deliberately. I'm gonna not go too deeply into this, but the massacre or my friend Ben Goldfarb, who wrote a book about beavers, calls it the furpocalypse. The massive extermination of beavers throughout the American West. We think of the American West as dry desert a lot, but really it used to be a lush landscape, and that was because of beavers. So that piece of the hydrology got changed also. Anyway, as growth exploded in and around Colorado Springs since World War II, impervious surfaces, paved roads, parking lot, driveways, sidewalks, water cannot soak into the ground like it used to. Instead, it runs off, adding water to the system. This is water that would have soaked into the ground, and it doesn't. And so it runs off, and where does it go? It goes into the fountain. If we add in the rerouting of incredible amounts of water from the Arkansas Basin, the Colorado River Basin, and later groundwater pumped from the Denver Basin, you got to remember that Colorado Springs gets about 80% of its water from outside of the fountain watershed. Most of it from the west slope. Well, where does that excess water go? That's not part of this system. It goes into the fountain. And this is why we now have a full-time river where we used to have a flashy creek. That's me. Next picture may be a little shocking. So, this question comes up like, okay, is this good or bad? Well, it's not good or bad. It just is. It just is what it is. We now, what do we have now? Because what we have now is because of choices we made in the past. So what do we do? And this is another thing too, is like, that just cracks me up, is I never growing up thought you could go fishing in the fountain other than getting little chubs and minnows in your hand, but David started taking me fishing and caught some good sized fish,
Pigs.
Yeah, got some pigs in there.
Yeah.
So anyway, what do we do now? This is where we run into a bit of the wall. You can't fight water. I think that's one of the big themes of my book. Water always wins. But we keep trying to fight water, and we keep trying to fight the fountain, corral it, control it, channelize it, and kind of make it obey us. But we're going to lose that battle, right? Because water always wins. So today we're spending tens of millions of taxpayers' dollars in what is ultimately, in my opinion, a sort of Don Quixote type effort. We're slapping bandages on a cancer patient to totally mix metaphors. We're working to repair a system that cannot be repaired by human hands. This is a system that will ultimately need to repair itself, but how does it do that? So, again, there's multiple jobs that a writer has, and one of those jobs is to make you feel uncomfortable. The job of a writer is to push you to think differently and to engage in new concepts. So, even though in some cases a lot of this presentation is really about stuff you guys already know, right? A lot of this history and stuff, but I'm asking you to think about it in a new way. and to think about how we relate to rivers in a new way. Ultimately, we want to unshackle the fountain and set it free. That's going to be the most cost-effective thing to do in the long run, but not in the short run, right? This is where we run into these really serious problems. The fountain over time will adjust to this new hydrology. That's going to take multiple generations and maybe even more than multiple generations. And it's going to cause, it will cause a lot of short-term pain to people, right? Because what we're already seeing, and we saw that in some of the pictures of erosion, is, as the fountain is trying to adjust, it's eating away people's land. It's eating away farmland, ranch land. It's undermining homes, roads, houses, all this kind of stuff. And it's then dumping tremendous amounts of sediment down in Pueblo, but really into the Arkansas, that then ends up in the lower Arkansas district. And the farmers don't want that either, because it's clogging their irrigation infrastructure and causing them a lot of problems. So, so what I'm kind of pushing here a little bit is not painless, and it's probably never going to happen. But, I'm going to push it anyway. Short-term pain versus long-term investment, right? Or we can just have endless expenses, keep fixing the same thing again and again, because that's where we're at. And I think, my conversations with Allie is like, she's got this $50 million. Well, it was $50 million. It's a lot less now, but this money to spend on these downstream repairs. But she knows full well that if you're going to fix a watershed, you got to fix your watershed upstream. The watershed, the repairs don't need to happen in Pueblo County. They need to happen up in Teller County and in El Paso County and in the city of Colorado Springs. You can't, because otherwise, you're just, again, slapping Band-Aids on a cancer patient. You're not solving anything. So, let's see. So, to kind of just wrap it all up, so that we can have a discussion and answer questions.
Drink more beer.
And drink more beer. Yeah, I didn't want to drink much while I was talking, because just get really messy. What are our choices here and, in the present? What does that mean for the future, right? We got to learn from the past to understand the present. And if we can understand the present, we can create a better future. Nothing is inevitable. It's all a series of choices. Aldo Leopold's land ethic essentially tells us that because of our elevated place in the world, because this is the Anthropocene, we have an obligation to care for other members of the world community. That includes other species and ecosystems, as well as entities or beings such as a river or a mountain. We have an obligation to the rest of the world to not destroy absolutely everything. So I'm going to end it there, go to questions or comments, or, yell at me or whatever you want to do. And thank you guys for coming. That's more interesting. But if you do want to order the book, it's a Torrey House Press. Just Google Torrey House Press.
But hopefully at Mount Chalet.
Oh yeah, Mountain Chalet and the Fountain Creek Nature Center has. What's that? Poor Richard. Yeah, I don't know if they have it yet, but I'm gonna do a talk at Poor Richards and a signing there too. But they should have it. I have them on sale here, just a flat $20 cash if you want, and I can sign it. But I think this is probably a more interesting picture here to leave for our discussion.
I like that picture with the fish.
I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna stop recording just for the Zoom land. Sorry. Stop share real quick. So we're gonna go ahead and end this Zoom. Thank you for attending, Ferris. We'll be in touch.